All right, everybody, welcome back. We are moving on to the next use of our trig magic word, and that is using our trig magic word to find missing angles in triangles. Yesterday, we dealt with finding missing sides. Today, finding missing angles. We're still going to use our trig magic word. All right. Again, I want to remind you of a couple things. First off, hashtag degree mode. All right, I'm going to keep reminding you of that, but at some point it's going to be up to you to remember that if you're dealing with angles that are in degrees, your calculator needs to be in degree mode. It's something that needs to just become automatic for you. All right, so a couple reminders about that. Again, if you're using your laptop calculator, it's usually automatically in degree mode, but you're going to have to kind of do some typing in of some stuff in reverse. I would highly recommend, though, that you get a graphing calculator, either an app on your phone or something to that effect. All right, but at the very least, if you're using your calculator, if you're using a calculator, you can go and use Desmos, right? Desmos, there's a link to it right here on the home page. All right, and be able to use Desmos and change it to degree mode by pressing this little wrench. Okay, come here to the wrench. It's in degree mode down here. Okay. All right, so let's get into our examples. Only a couple examples today, but the important thing is we're going to do something a little bit different. Okay. All right, so let's look what we have here. Again, we have a right triangle, so we know that we are going to be dealing with our trig magic word, SOHCAHTOA. All right, quick review. What does that mean? S stands for sine. O stands for opposite. H stands for hypotenuse. Cosine. A stands for adjacent. Hypotenuse for H. T stands for tangent. O is opposite. A is adjacent. Okay, that's our trig magic word. That's what helps us keep everything together. Our three main trig functions are sine, cosine, and tangent, and these are the sides that make up that ratio. Okay, so let's come to our triangle. Again, first thing, let's label it. Across from the right angle, that's our hypotenuse. Right? Here's theta. Okay, now it's back to being just this Greek letter theta. Again, get used to saying that. Try practicing it a couple times. Theta. Okay, across from theta, we always label with opposite. Again, this side is blank. There's no number. There's no x. I'm going to avoid labeling it so that it doesn't start to confuse me. Okay. All right. Now let's go back to our triangle and see what we've labeled. Can we make a connection between what we've labeled and one of our trig ratios? Looking at our trig magic word, we've got opposite, hypotenuse. Those two are together in the sine function. Okay. So we're going to write down sine of theta. This time it's a theta again, but it's not like yesterday where we had sine of 30 degrees or something like that. Okay, but now it's sine of theta. It's very important you put that there. Equals. Now follow the magic word. O comes first, so that goes on top. Opposite, which is 6 over hypotenuse, which is 12. Okay. Now, you can go ahead and reduce this if you want to. It's not going to matter. I would encourage you just leave it the way it is. We're not done calculating. The calculators can handle that. Okay. What we need to understand now is if I want to figure out what theta is, if I want theta by itself, then I have to undo this trig function. Okay. Now, you got to be careful. This is not a multiplication happening. Okay, that's not sine times theta. Sine is a function. So we want to do sine of theta, not sine times theta. So dividing is not going to work. Okay, you undo functions by using other functions. And what we call those functions that undo other functions, we call those inverses. For example, multiplication and division are inverse functions. They undo each other. Okay. Addition and subtraction are inverse functions. They undo each other. So if we want to undo sine, we want sine to go away, we have to undo it with its inverse function. Okay? we have to use its inverse. And the way we designate that is that we are going to apply the inverse. And the inverse is sine with a little -1 on there. That little -1 means we're talking about the inverse. And if we do it to one side, we're going to have to do it to the other. Okay, so sine inverse will undo sine, and that'll leave us with just theta, which is what we want. So the part that we have to go calculate is this part. Okay, now we have to be careful because sine inverse is not the same as sine. Okay, let's pull up our TI and how we would find that. Okay, if you look on the TI, remember yesterday, that's where we had sine. There's our sine button. Okay, let me clear this out so we're not got too much in there. Let's verify that we're in degree mode, and we still are. Okay, but notice that if I reset my calculator and I check the mode, it's back out of degree mode. So I got to go make sure it's still in degree mode. So it's worth checking every time. Okay, all right. And again, here's our sine button. If you look right above it in a little blue right there, there's sine inverse, that little -1. So to get to it, we press second and then sine. And we want to do sine inverse of 6 over 12. 6 divided by 12. Okay? Notice we get 30. So theta is 30. 30 what? 30 degrees. It's an angle, and we were in degree mode, so it would be 30 degrees. Okay? This is just kind of the opposite of what we did yesterday. In fact, if you look at the first example we did yesterday, it's basically the reverse of this. Okay? Now, if you had reduced this to 1/2, it wouldn't have mattered. Okay, watch. Sine inverse of 1/2, right? 6 divided by 12 is like saying 0.5 or half. So you could call it a half. You could have called it 0.5. It didn't matter. So I'm encouraging you, just if you know this is going to reduce, you can reduce it, but just leave it alone because you know the calculator can handle it. Okay? So that's how we're going to end up doing it with our TIs. If you're going to use this calculator here, your scientific calculator, you can still do it, but you got to do some things in reverse, right? You got to set up your fraction first. Let's clear everything. Let's do 6 divided by 12. You got to do that fraction first, okay? And then you have to come to your trigonometry, press second, and then sine inverse that. Okay, trigonometry, press second, and then sine inverse. Okay, there you go. All right. And there's our 30 that it shows it is going to be. Okay, the next example we'll do a decimals. But what's important about this is that you go back and you label it, you set up your trig ratio, and to undo a trig function, you have to use an inverse. That's going to be an important question that I'm going to ask you all year, over and over and over. How do you undo a trig function? How do you find an angle? If you're looking for an angle, you're going to have to use an inverse. Okay, so if I ask you, how do you find an angle? You're going to have to say, use an inverse. Okay, how do you find an angle? Use an inverse. All right, let's try another one. Okay, before we move on, I just want to point out that sine of 30 is not the same thing as sine inverse of 30. Okay, those are not the same. Notice one's got a little inverse thing, so make sure you're using the right function in your calculator when you're doing your calculations. Okay, all right, last example, same thing. We want to find theta. We want to figure out this value, okay? We want to know what angle is that? What's the value of that angle? Okay, so again, we label our triangle. We know that this across from the 90 is the hypotenuse. Across from theta we call opposite. And next to theta we call adjacent. Let's call it ADJ. Okay, and again, trigonometric word. Hopefully you're putting this down on top of the page that you're doing your work for your assignment on. Okay? I know the assignments are in Canvas, but you're going to need a piece of paper to do work. Okay, you're going to need a piece of paper to set things up and do the work. All right, trigonometric word, SOHCAHTOA. Which one are we using? Here's theta. We don't have anything for the hypotenuse. We don't have a variable. We don't have a number. Okay, so I know I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about opposite and adjacent. That's tangent. Opposite and adjacent are together in the tangent function. So not tan, we're going to write tan, but we're not going to say it when we talk to each other. So tangent of theta equals opposite, the O comes first, so it goes on top, so 9 over A comes next, so the adjacent goes on the bottom. Okay, and again, this does reduce, but let's just not reduce it. We know we're not done. We want to figure out theta. All right, here's that same question I was going to tell you to ask you. How do you find an angle? You got to use an inverse. All right, so and if I want theta by itself, I'm going to have to get rid of tangent. And I can't divide by tangent because this is not multiplication. This is a separate function. So if you want to undo a function, you use the inverse function. So we're going to do tangent inverse. Okay, and when we do the left side to get rid of tangent, we have to do on the right side so that we can do our calculation. We're going to do tangent inverse of 9 over 12. Okay, let's do Desmos this time. Let's show that in Desmos. Okay, again, I already know I'm in degrees. All right, here's my little keyboard right down here. We need to do our functions. Which function did we need? We needed tangent inverse of 9 over 12. Okay, and that's what we get, 36.87. If we're rounding this to the second decimal place, that's followed by a 9. That's going to tell us to round this up. Okay, so 36.87. Okay, 36.87. Okay, now, if we were answering our question on the assignment in Canvas, I said go ahead and round it to the nearest tenth. And to the nearest tenth would make this be 36.9. Okay, because the original one was 36.869. Even then, that 6 would make that 8 round up. Okay, so that's what we'll type in Canvas as an answer for this one. Oh, and don't forget to put degrees because this was an angle in degree mode that we found. Okay, 36.9 degrees. You won't need to type in a degree symbol in Canvas. I'm just going to ask you for that angle in degrees automatically. Okay, so don't worry about trying to find that degree thing in Canvas. Okay, so that's how we find the measure of angles using our calculator for right triangles and our magic trig word. Okay, remember, to find an angle, you have to use an inverse. All right, look forward to catching up with you on Teams. Come with questions, and let's get our practice in.